There are quite a few biblical passages that have done great harm to people, and some of them have brought about that harm because those passages are just by nature not very pleasant. They're quite ugly. John Shelby Spong calls these passages the sins of Scripture. Some passages, on the other hand, have imposed great harm because of how they have been interpreted throughout history. And today, in my opinion, we get one of those passages, the text about the creation of the human community, the bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh text. Now, this is a text that I often will recommend to couples that they could use for their weddings, and generally, before we even talk about it, they, especially the women, will say, "No way," primarily because of how this reading has been interpreted throughout history. The interpretation goes something like this: men were created first, and then came women. And women are a subset of men. Men are superior, they're the first creation. Women are inferior, men are first, women are second, and then, by the way, come the children. Women were created to help men out. After all, doesn't it say it is not good that the man should be alone? I will make a helper as his partner. Well, yes, it does say that, but I want to look more closely at this story to see what it's really saying. And first, I want to talk about a couple of words. I personally think that the word man, and I appreciate what Paula was trying to do in that children's sermon today, I think that the word man is a bad translation in our story, in the first part of the story. The word is Adam, and Adam means literally from the dust. I think a better translation would be earth creature rather than man. The latter part of the word Adam, by the way, in the Hebrew, signifies plurality. More than one of us. I often call my friend Adam, whom I met at a coffee shop, all of us. When Adam comes into my presence, I say, "There is all of us. There goes all of us." The name Adam does not signify a gender. It is the name that describes the human race. All of us. So before you go thinking of Adam being like a man, like I am a man, think of Adam representing all of us in one human being. Adam is all of us who come from the ground, which is all of us. But in the story, the earth creature has a problem. Adam is alone. The earth creature, Adam, is lonely, and God says this isn't how it should be. Humans are not meant to live in isolation. So God says, "I will find a helper for Adam." Now, don't think of a helper. Don't think of a helper as a word to describe a lackey who does Adam's wash or cleans Adam's toilet. Elsewhere in the Bible, helper describes God. God is said to be Israel's helper. God is seeking someone a lot like Adam to provide companionship for Adam, who will assist the earth creature in living life fully. Well, before God gets it right in the story, God presents a whole lot of animals to the earth creature, birds in the air, the cows and the horses in the field, and then gives Adam the responsibility to name all those. You see, Adam, the earth creature, has status, just as the human being in today's psalm has status. Adam, the earth creature, is clothed with honor and glory. Just as God has responsibility for the world, Adam has responsibility. Adam can name the animals, and name them he did. Or it did, is probably how I should say that. Well, not to look a gift horse in the mouth, but the animals aren't enough for Adam. Now, I know, I'm going to get in trouble with some of you here, but I'm just the messenger. I am just the messenger. Dogs, cats, horses, turtles, llamas, they're all great. They're all wonderful. but they're not people. But for Adam, there was not found a helper as Adam's partner. There was still a deep loneliness after Adam got the horse. So, God acts as a great anesthesiologist and puts Adam to sleep. And out of Adam's side, the rib is probably a bad translation there, out of Adam's side, God creates another human being. And now in the story is when we get gender. In fact, the Hebrew changes here because all of a sudden we have gender. We have what we would call a man and a woman. And Adam says, finally, one like me. Not somebody I can boss around, but somebody who is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. Someone enough like me that we can be in this together. God creates two out of one. Out of Adam comes two. And it's all gift. It's a matter of wonder. It's a matter of joy. And then Genesis says, this story explains some things. Many of the stories of Genesis, they are not historical. Let's just make that quite clear. They weren't meant to be historical. They were initially used in some cultures probably to explain the origins of things. Ancient people love to know where things came from. So they told stories about why work is so hard and why women are afraid of snakes. That's one of the stories in Genesis. And you can always tell in Genesis when we have such a story, the scholars call them etiologies, because the story will begin with the word therefore. Or not the story, the text will say therefore. After the story comes the word therefore. Therefore, a man leaves his father and his mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. Now we know why men and women are attracted to each other in the first place, why they become one flesh, which is the Bible's polite way of saying having sex. They used to be one. They used to be Adam, and God divided them for the sake of companionship. And let's be honest, for the sake of reproduction, for the sake of the continuity of the human species. And it's all good, for you see, it wasn't good to be alone, but it is good to be in relationship, to be in community, and also to be diverse, to be male and female, to be in a position of longing for the other, to be sexual. It's all good. So this story is not a story about how men are superior to women. There's plenty of that you can find in the Bible, but this is not the story. It's about how deeply connected we all are. So connected that we all come from the same stuff. What would happen if Israel, Hezbollah, and Hamas, if the Russians, if American citizens and non-American citizens, if you and I realize that we are so connected that even our enemies, even those who are not a part of our group, come from the same stuff, we're all related, we're all connected, bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. So to kill someone else, to defame them, to tear them down, is to kill your relatives and ultimately yourself. Yes, we're different. From the beginning of creation, God made them male and female, Jesus says today. Difference and diversity are a part of the goodness of God. It's part of what makes life delightful. It's a part of the wonder of creation. We are made for each other, for relationship, for community, and it is not good for us to be alone. And if we're just hanging out with ourselves, with everyone who is just like us, who looks like us, who thinks like us, well, we will miss out on the full joy and wonder of being alive. Diversity and humanity is at the center of God's goodness. It's all good. Now, I want you to keep all of this in mind as you deal with what Jesus has to say about divorce today. Because Jesus, when he is being tested by the Pharisees, doesn't make his point on the basis of the law, a listing of when and if you can get a divorce. Rather, he speaks about the wonder and glory of creation. The Pharisees want to trap him. They want him to come down on one side or other in the argument about when divorce is permissible, something, by the way, that Mark's community would have been dealing with. But what Jesus does is to talk about what God has wanted from the beginning. From the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined as one, and two become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. And again, Jesus is talking about sex here. One flesh, again, is the Bible's polite way of talking about sexual relations. In sexual relations, we become one, and that is a very good thing. Oneness is what God has wanted from the beginning, and so you don't want to treat a good thing poorly. Marriage is a good thing. It needs to be treated well because people need to be treated well. People are not throwaway objects. Relationships are at the center of being human. Relationships need to be tended to, especially those relationships where two become one, where they become one flesh. There is a depth to a relationship when it is sealed by bodily entanglement. Sex is a great gift, but it's not just about pleasure, it's about unity. And in some ways, in such unity, there's no going back. The deep vulnerability of a bodily, intimate relationship can't be eliminated. So we want to care for and be faithful with our marriages, our bodies, and our sexuality. God's intention for creation is unity. And therefore, we cannot be flippant about that which brings unity. Now, what does all this say about divorce? Well, first of all, marriage demands our best work. It should not be entered into lightly, nor treated cavalierly. Unity is God's intention. But I also think that God's intention for life is joy. Jesus says in Mark that the Sabbath was made for humans and not humans for the Sabbath. Now, from what we know, he didn't say the same thing about marriage, but I suspect if he were sitting right among us, he might, if he were asked. And he'd say something like, marriage is made for humans and not humans for marriage. Marriage was meant to be a means by which the joy of creation could be lived out. And sometimes some relationships make creation look like a bad thing, not a good thing. Sometimes some relationships are abusive, are ugly, are not life-giving, and they need to be ended. The goodness of creation demands that they be ended. But don't think for one moment that ending those relationships won't have consequences. It will. One fleshness has residual impact. But sometimes, as Luther urged, we must sin boldly. Life isn't always about good or bad. Sometimes it is about bad or worse. And sometimes divorce is the much better option than maintaining relationships that are not life-giving, that do not celebrate creation, that do not result in our saying with joy, "At last, bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." Amen.